Hello again, everyone. We conclude debate week here on the Arkansas Educational Television Network with a race for governor. One of the three men on stage will be Chief Executive Officer of Arkansas for the next 4 years. In alphabetical order, the nominees are Jared Henderson, the Democratic Party nominee, Asa Hutchinson, the incumbent and Republican nominee, and Mark West, the Libertarian Party candidate. The candidates will be questioned by a panel of Arkansas reporters: Lance Turner of Arkansas Business, Michael Hiblin of KUAR Public Radio, and Una Lee of KHBS KHOG. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Each will have 2 minutes to respond to a question, while rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of opening statements, rebuttals, closing statements was determined all prior to the broadcast tonight by a drawing in which the candidates or their representatives participated. Our timekeeper this hour is Clara Vasquez. And with that, our first opening statement tonight, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to start by thanking AETN for hosting this debate. I'd like to thank our moderators. I'd like to thank Governor Hutchinson and Mark West for joining me on stage today to share our competing visions with all the people that are watching. You know, I'm running for governor because I know when this state's at its best, we can expand opportunity and justice to people at a profound and rapid rate. I've learned that in my own experience as an Arkansan. 40 years ago, I was given up for adoption by an unmarried teenage mother. I was taken in by a family that taught me this central lesson. Just 2 generations ago in my family, my grandmother grew up in Oil Trough, Arkansas. She went to the 8th grade twice because there was no 9th grade. Today, her grandson stands here as a college graduate, a former employee of NASA, and is a candidate to be the next governor of Arkansas. I want every child in every family to have the same fair shot that mine had. But we have a long way to go. Right now, as we speak, there's a math teacher in the heart of the Arkansas Delta who found out just 5 days before his students arrived this year that he was going to be required to teach 5 subjects. That's not fair to him, and it doesn't come close to providing the opportunity his precious students deserve. I'm not running because I blame Governor Hutchinson for realities like this, but I am running because I want a governor who's on fire to do something about it. And the truth is, we do have very different beliefs about what unlocks opportunity for people in this state. Governor Hutchinson sincerely believes that one of our most important initiatives next year needs to be a $180 million tax cut for the wealthiest Arkansans. I believe we need to invest some of those resources, making public school teaching one of our most important and attractive jobs. We've spent a lot of the last 3 years making it harder for some of our most vulnerable citizens to get Medicaid. I think that we need to focus on making health insurance affordable for all of our citizens and the businesses that provide it. I don't know what the governor's stance is or what he would do about childhood poverty, but I know that other states have taken this on. They've cut their teenage pregnancy rates in half in a handful of years. They've crushed the cycle of poverty in countless families and communities. We can too, and that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Mr. Henderson, thank you. Mr. Hutchinson.
It is good to be on the campus of UCA, and I'm grateful for AETN for sponsoring this series of debates. Whenever you look at a candidate running for re-election, the first test of re-election is, did you do what you said you were going to do, and did you keep your promises? Growing up on a farm in northwestern Arkansas, parents who had high school educations, they instilled in me the value of education. That's why I understand how important education is to Arkansas. 4 years ago, I pledged that we were going to, first of all, have a $100 million income tax cut. Secondly, we were going to put computer coding into every high school in Arkansas. And then I said that I wanted to be the jobs governor in Arkansas and create more opportunity for our young people. How did we do on those measuring sticks? First of all, we accomplished the tax cut that we promised, put more money in people's pockets. Secondly, not only did we put computer coding in every high school in Arkansas, we now lead the nation in computer science education. And when you talk about creating jobs, we've created 70,000 jobs, reached the lowest unemployment rate in the history of Arkansas, and we're going to continue to do that. And the results are, because jobs have been created, 65,000 people have moved out of poverty over the last 4 years in Arkansas. That's because they're working, their income levels goes up. And so I'm running for re-election. Hold me accountable with what I promised and what we did. And if you look at the future, though, that's what I'm excited about, because in the future we're going to continue to create jobs, build a transportation system that's second to none here in Arkansas. We're going to improve teacher pay and put more money in their pockets, and we're going to transform government. I look forward to the debate today.
And Mr. Hutchinson is thanked. Mr. West.
Well, thank you, Steve. I also want to thank AETN, the panelists, and UCA for putting this event together so that voters can hear these differing views on how our government should operate in this state. I also thank all of you that are listening. Most of all, I want to thank my wife of 22 years, Christy, and my 3 kids, because without their support, there wouldn't be a campaign. My fellow Arkansans, I want to talk to you tonight about things that are different. And one of those differences you're going to see is with the guys sharing the stage with me. They both have a completely different view, a more polished view, a more political view of things, and I come from a more average Arkansan view. For those that don't know me, I am Mark West, the Libertarian candidate for governor. I'm not D.C., I'm not Ivy League, I'm just a Main Street Arkansas guy. I've spent my entire adult life working 2 jobs, just trying to make ends meet. I work paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes that paycheck doesn't go as far as the bills. I understand that struggle. I was born and raised in West Memphis, blue-collar family. My father was hardworking and instilled hard work in me. And I'm proud to say that I graduated from West Memphis High School and Arkansas State University. And I've spent more than half of my life in the Delta, which is why healing the Delta economy is so important to me and such a key point of my campaign. I don't think it's right that 90% of our counties in this state are in economic decline, while the economic growth is limited to very few places like Springdale. What I want to show you tonight is a difference in how to view government. My 2 opponents both tonight believe that government has the solution to everything, just in varying levels. You have a Democrat solution and a Republican solution, and what I want to talk about tonight is the Arkansas solution. I want to talk about how we can limit the role of government so that the entire state can rise up together. I believe that by empowering you, we can empower Arkansas, and it can become the destination state for liberty so that our kids and grandchildren will choose to build their lives and careers here.
Mr. West, thank you. Our first question tonight comes from Lance Turner, and it goes first to Mr. Henderson.
Good evening. Arkansas this year became the first state to implement a work requirement for people on the state's Medicaid expansion program under the Affordable Care Act. So far, 7,800 people have been removed from the program under the new requirement. Critics have complained that the process for enrollees to verify themselves as meeting that requirement, a process that relies on internet access, is out of reach for many and not well publicized. Is the process a fair one, and how might it be improved?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. I think this is one of the most important topics we can discuss in this debate because of the profound effect it has on so many folks. You know, this is an interesting topic. I think it's one of the first times in Governor Hutchinson's political career where he's actually worked to create a new bureaucracy and a part-time website to put between some of our citizens and access to health insurance. You know, and I am all for able-bodied people working and doing their part. But I think that access to health insurance is an enabler of that, not an inhibitor. And I also know that beyond the harm that we can do when we deprive some of our most vulnerable citizens of access to health insurance, it goes beyond just their own welfare. You know, I read earlier this week that 16,000 people are on track to fail to qualify. If 16,000 people lose their access to Medicaid, we're going to have countless doctors and nurses and health professionals that are going to do more uncompensated care. We could put the survival of some of our rural hospitals at risk. We'll end up raising the cost of insurance for everyone else that buys it or provides it to compensate for that uncompensated care that's going to be provided when people show up to the doctor and to ERs without Medicaid coverage. As we scale back Medicaid, we also deprive our economy of the federal dollars that come in. So I just think this is bad policy all around. And it's not because I don't think people should do their fair shot. I think that health care, that Medicaid is an enabler of that. We ought to celebrate it. The discussion that we should be having in this state is how do we lower the cost of health care? You know, insurance premiums are going up double digits every year, and that's if you're healthy. One of the single most important problems we could solve for the average Arkansan family is talking about and fixing that. That would not only help families, it would also help the businesses that are struggling with how to provide it and do right by their employees. We can do this, but we've got to start by having the right discussions.
Mr. Henderson, thank you. Mr. West.
Yes, one of the, to answer your question, is the process fair? No. There are a lot of parts of our state that lack the infrastructure necessary to make it easy for people to access the internet, to do the reporting, or to actually have the transportation to get where they do the reporting so they can qualify. But it's also unfair because the state shouldn't be involved in charity. The state shouldn't be involved in providing health care to people. What this does in the long run is it robs the state of Arkansas, because so many of our citizens are people that believe in charity. I don't know about you, but I know the communities I live in, charity is a big deal. People give to charitable organizations. Every Thanksgiving, one of my favorite things to do is scoop up my kids and my wife, and we go to a church and we serve the homeless and the poor a Thanksgiving meal. Charity is a big thing in Arkansas. People love to give. And I feel that what we have with these government-mandated, government-run solutions is we rob the state of that opportunity to build community. Because we build community when we're able to meet those needs together, when we see our neighbor in need and we find a way to meet their need ourselves. We don't go to the government and demand, because what you create is this dependency where you're dependent on another solution from the government. You're dependent on more money from the government or more infrastructure from the government, when instead you can build it yourself. Now, how do we improve it? I think one thing we can do is begin scaling back regulations and laws that make it harder for direct care clinics to come into this state. Direct care clinics are able to cut basic health care costs by 70 to 80%, and there are a couple of them in this state. And what they do is they provide a full-service clinic. You have a subscription service at a low rate that most people can afford, and those that can't, most charities will be able to afford, and will be able to help provide those needs for those that are most vulnerable. And if the goal is cutting health care costs, there's two ways to do it, and do it in a way that builds communities in Arkansas so we come up together.
Mr. West, thank you. Mr. Hutchinson.
Whenever you have a lower unemployment rate than the national average, when you've reached the lowest unemployment rate in the history of Arkansas, people are working, but also we need to move more people into the workforce. The work requirement is a way to not only balance compassion with responsibility, but it's also, for those able-bodied people without dependent children at home, a means for them to get more training, to be able to find access to a job, and that's what we want to do. We don't want to leave them in generations of poverty. We want to assist them with health care, but also to get the training necessary to work. That's why the work requirement is absolutely the right balance that we can achieve. When it comes to how we have implemented this, it is important to know that anybody who needs assistance, they go to the DHS office just like they do on SNAP benefits. They get the assistance they need. We just want to be able to identify them so that we can help them move on to work and get the training that's needed. The people of Arkansas support this kind of work requirement for able-bodied individuals, and they support it, and Mr. Henderson's idea would cost us a lot. First of all, to say that someone who's able-bodied shouldn't have to be working when they don't have dependent children adds to that burden and that generational poverty. We want to move them to work. Secondly, if under Mr. Henderson's proposal, there would be over 250,000 people that would lose their health insurance, and here's the reason why. Because without that work requirement, it will not have the support of the Arkansas legislature and the Arkansas public. They would lose their insurance, the whole program would die. The work requirement is the right balance.
Mr. Henderson.
Yes. Well, I simply don't agree that the majority of the Arkansas public doesn't support helping some of our most vulnerable citizens have access to health care. I've talked to thousands of them, not just over the course of this campaign, but in my work in the Delta and in southern Arkansas. And I think, when the governor talks about getting support from the legislature, he's thinking about Medicaid through the same political lens that he's probably thought about it for 30 years, as a big government versus small government problem. To me, I look at this through the eyes of a leader. And I believe, and I know, I've met families all over the Delta. This is an enabler of them being able to work, not an inhibitor. And if we want to spend less on Medicaid, and I think all of us up here do, it's not by throwing people off or creating obstacles, it's by solving the underlying problem. If we do what other states have done around this country, if we can cut our rate of teenage pregnancy by 30, 40, or 50%, in 5 and 10 years, we'll be spending dramatically less on Medicaid, and we won't leave a single vulnerable citizen behind in the process.
Michael Hiblin has the next question. First to Mr. West.
Mr. West, this year we've had several former Arkansas state lawmakers convicted of corruption, taking bribes or kickbacks, and investigations continue into others, including the nephew of Governor Asa Hutchinson, former state senator Jeremy Hutchinson, who already faces charges of using campaign funds for personal expenses. As governor, specifically, what do you feel needs to be done to rein in this kind of corruption?
Michael, thank you for that question. It's a great question. What we need to begin doing is looking at what this has done to our state as far as the public trust. People in this state trust their government less. A lot of them already trusted it on a lower scale, and now they trust it less. One of the things that I would say about corruption is, it's human nature. Human nature is what drives the corruption that we have in Little Rock, and I think it's unfair to blame one party or the other. We need to put blame where it really is. And the big problem we have and the biggest threat to the future of our state is the size of our government. There is too much money in Little Rock, and there's too much power in Little Rock. This is why I've proposed the Committee on Spending and Taxation. And what we're going to do with cost is we're going to look at every agency, every department. We're going to look at every function of our government. We're going to look at every regulation, every rule. And we're going to look for areas where we have redundancy, where we have overreach, where we have unconstitutional things happening, and we're going to recommend those cuts to the state legislature. And then we're going to do a statewide tour, and we're going to go to every city and town, and we're going to tell you what we propose to the state legislature and tell you to make your legislatures pass that and pass those cuts so that we can cut the corruption. Because when you cut the money in Little Rock and when you cut the power in Little Rock, you cut the atmosphere that creates corruption. But at the same time, we also need to hold those who have been involved accountable. That means if you have been involved with bribery, you need to be paying the taxpayers back for that. And that doesn't matter to me if you were a legislator or a business or a lobbyist. You should be paying the taxpayers back for that money. Also, any piece of legislation that can be shown to have been passed through any of these means, bribes or whatever, we need to put those to the legislature for immediate repeal, because we shouldn't continue to pay for bills that were bought with bribery. We need a governor who's going to take leadership and stand up for the people of Arkansas, and that's what I plan to do.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Someone who served in public life, in Congress, and 2 presidents, it's very troubling as governor to see these kind of ethical violations, really criminal conduct. And it starts with the heart. You've got to have your elected officials doing the right thing and hold them accountable when they don't. Under these circumstances, you see that this started in 2013, 2014, long before I became governor. The wrongdoing has crossed administrations, has crossed political parties, and we want to hold those that are responsible accountable. The second thing that we need to do, though, is to make sure that our ethics laws are strengthened. We want to strengthen the penalty provisions for the Ethics Commission. We want to be able to make sure that our campaign finance laws, that there's proper disclosures. And so there's a reform package that I've presented that we hope will pass, that will help to make sure that we prevent conflicts of interest, we have the right transparency there, and we hold people accountable. Let me come back, though, to something I think is very important that's already been raised, and that is the work requirement. Mr. Henderson raised the point that somehow we're going to magically get the legislature to approve $250,000 being on the expanded Medicaid when we don't add reform measures in there like the work requirement. Under his plan, there would be $250,000 or more that would lose their health insurance because the legislature would not enact and approve the Medicaid expansion. Arkansas works without that work requirement. It takes 3/4 vote of the legislature, and this is where it's not a practical solution to say we're going to do away with the work requirement. We're not going to ask people to be responsible and accountable. We're just going to spend the money, and then that's when the program ends and 250,000 people would be out of health care.
Mr. Henderson.
Well, I'd start by saying I do think that it is very appropriate to ask people to be held accountable and to be responsible, particularly when they're the most powerful people in our society, like our legislators. And, you know, I'm glad to hear that the governor is finally coming around and has produced a plan that lives somewhere, but I know that up until a month or two ago, there was no plan, and that his initial response to this latest the latest instances of corruption, the latest indictments, was sadness. I think the appropriate response to this is outrage and action. Because while these things have been happening across administrations and over years, while it is not the governor's fault that this has happened, I do think it is a governor's responsibility to look problems like this squarely in the eye and to figure out common sense things we can do to raise the deterrent for powerful people abusing their power, to put in place measures of transparency, basic steps that require information up front that make it harder to do this in the first place. I think we need to go even beyond that. You know, people across the political spectrum that I met all year in this state, they are so turned off by our politics for a variety of measures. We need to go further by doing things like shining a light on dark money, rooting out some of the most corrosive practices in our politics that poison things on the left and the right. This, to me, is what leadership looks like in the face of these transgressions. We have had 7 legislators convicted or indicting. As we sit here on this stage right now, we have a sitting Republican legislator that has not paid taxes in more than a decade, but that is getting a paycheck from the Arkansas taxpayers right now. That is an outrage, and we need aggressive action to correct the situation now and to minimize it to the greatest extent we possibly can in the future.
Mr. West, you have 1 minute.
Arkansas, I don't know if you guys heard it, but the governor's plan is simply this. We're going to let the legislators take care of the legislators. We're going to make them tell on each other and hold each other accountable. I argue if that was going to work, it would have worked already. We wouldn't be looking at people being indicted and going away. The reason the governor doesn't want to address the fact that the money and the power in Little Rock is what's leading to the corruption is because Governor Hutchinson is part of the problem. He is part of using that money and that power to push politics, to push legislation, to push regulation, and to make sure that his friends, his corporate cronies, are the ones who benefit. Well, as long as his corporate cronies benefit, every Arkansan suffers because we suffer a lack of trust in our government, and then we suffer a lack of belief that our government is actually working for us instead of for the corporate cronies and the cronyism coming out of Little Rock.
Una Lee has our next question. It goes first to Mr. Hutchinson.
Governor Hutchinson, you released a government transformation plan, a plan you say will save about $15 million and cut the number of departments from 42 to 15. How do you ensure that state employees will keep their jobs, and how do you ensure that implementing this all at once runs smoothly for employees and Arkansans?
Well, first of all, you have to look at the track record on transformation. This is not something we just started on in the last 6 months. We've been working on it for 4 years, and we've already, through combining agencies, mergers, we have reduced state employment by 1,500 employees. Now, this was simply by attrition. When someone retired, when they left government employment, we looked at it, do we really need that position? Can we save and be more efficient through technology? And as a result of that, we've saved taxpayers money. Now we're looking at the larger scale of things with transformation, where we take 42 departments of government that report directly to me, reduce them down to 15, largest government transformation since Governor Dale Bumpers initiated it in the 1970s. So it's a very significant transformation. What do you say to the state employees? Look at my track record. We are not going to be eliminating positions just because we're having a transformation. Over time, there will be natural efficiencies that will be achieved through technology, through consolidations. Employees' jobs will be protected, but we will lose some employment through efficiencies over time. That's the humanitarian way to approach it. And through this, we're going to have great success. Better delivery of services for the taxpayers, more accountability, and we'll save some money down the road. One transformation thing we did through technology is it used to be that you'd have to go down to the revenue office to get your car tags renewed. Take your number, wait in line until your number is called. Now you can go online, you can renew your tags, you can pay your sales tax. That's the kind of transformation that makes sense in a technological world that we need to apply to government as well.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Henderson, 2 minutes.
Yes. Well, I do think that there is a big opportunity to make government work better for people. But I haven't seen that so far. You know, Governor Hutchinson's been in office for 46 months. There seems to be a plan. I've seen press conferences where there's new org charts. I even saw a 6-foot stack of unopened copier paper that I guess indicated government regulations that we've got rid of. To me, if you can't explain clearly and simply what you want to deliver for people in government, then you don't really have any hope of transforming it in a positive direction. To me, government transformation looks pretty simple. It means for each department and sub-department, whether it's DHS or education, it means having 5 to 10 simple, measurable public goals that affect people's day-to-day welfare and lives, that allow for public accountability, that not only ensure that the people get what they need from government at a good price, but also so that state employees know what they're being held accountable for and feel empowered and fired up to go achieve it. That, to me, is how you transform government. It starts by asking, what do we want to achieve for the people? And I haven't heard that. I don't see it. And we're 4 years in, and I think at this point we don't have any results to show for it yet. I think we can do better.
Mr. West.
Yes, I appreciate the question, Una. Transformation of our government is something that's very important, and it should be a top priority for any leader in any administration. One of the things that has stood out to me is it has taken 4 years, and this is what we have. Back in the spring when I proposed costs, the governor almost within a week was talking about transformation and this big announcement of all that was going to happen, and this government was going to look so much different, and it was going to be so transformed and revitalized, and we were going to be looking at a new Arkansas government and a new way that our government should work. And then they released the plan this week, and I'm sorry, but when I looked at it, the first thing that came to mind was it looked like they just took a deck of cards, shuffled them around, and then sorted them by suit and said, hey, your government's transformed. I'm sorry, that doesn't go far enough. This transformation is not looking into the departmental, the regulatory, and the agency overreach that I'm hearing from so many Arkansans about, whether it's DHS, whether it's Arkansas Game and Fish. I'm hearing from Arkansans daily that are upset with the overreach in this government, and this transformation doesn't do that. Now, I do applaud the governor. I'm glad to see us stepping into the new millennium, stepping up with technology and his coding initiatives in school. I like those things. I want to see us be ready for the future. But at the same time, we have to deal with some fundamental issues, some fundamental overreach that is creating problems with the people. It is making people resent their government. It is making people afraid to hear that government might be at the door. And people should not be afraid of their government. Their government should be afraid of them. And a true leader would make sure the people know that the government is here for them and the government is responsive to them. The government isn't here to be a lord over them, to tell them what they have to do to run a business or to tell them what they have to do with personal and private decisions. And that's what I would like to bring to Little Rock.
Mr. West, thank you. Mr. Hutchinson, back to you for 1 minute.
This transformation is very significant. If you do not see the great work of our state employees over the last 4 years, then you haven't been paying attention to what they've done in terms of reforming our human services so that we are more effective in delivering care for our foster children. It's so important in Arkansas. We've reformed Medicaid so that actually last year we had 0 growth in Medicaid. This is an example of what our state employees are doing in creating 70,000 jobs, recruiting industry to our state. The Department of Health doing an incredible job containing and making sure we don't have epidemics that spread. This is the day-to-day hard work of government. When you look at the future, no specific plan has been proposed by Mr. Henderson. He just points the gun and says we're not doing enough. When you look at transformation, one of the things we've done is create for the first time in history an Inspector General's office. It gives us a capability to detect fraud, to detect misuse of funds, and that's the important kind of transformation that will help us protect taxpayer dollars.
Michael Hiblin has the next question, first for Mr. Henderson.
Education advocates are debating the impact of charter schools across the country. In Arkansas, we've seen a steady increase in the number of charter schools, but many say that this investment diverts money and attention and students away from existing public schools. Does Arkansas need more charter schools, or do we need to be investing more in public education?
I think, and if I could only tell the people of this state one thing, the most important investment, the most important priority that we need to have over the next 10 years is making this the best state in the United States to be a public school teacher. If we do that, kids in every zip code, in traditional public schools, in charter schools, will have the core of what they need to have a fair shot in this economy and in this world. We are living in a time right now where we need our educators to get kids to and through college. We need them to equip and train kids for good, well-paying technical and vocational jobs. And we need them to prepare our precious kids for jobs that don't even exist yet. While this is happening over the last decade, we've seen a vast drop in the number of people that are entering this most crucial profession. That has to be the single problem that we solve. In my campaign 2 months ago, we proposed a comprehensive plan to do that. A plan that was built by listening to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teachers, not just over the last year of this campaign, but over the last decade of my career. It involves raising teacher pay, not just so that Arkansas can be regionally competitive, but so that we can be nationally competitive. It involves safeguarding their benefits, their retirement system, which is one of the few things we already get right if we want to make this a world-class place to be a teacher. It means figuring out how we make their health insurance more affordable. And it means figuring out how do we actually get government, whether it's in Little Rock or in D.C., off their back. You know, if you listen to teachers, if you ask them one thing they want to change to help them reach their kids, it's actually not pay. The first thing that they talk about is how buried they are by government, how they have to prove through tests and evaluation systems and other endless forms of bureaucracy that they care about their kids, that they're competent, and that they're doing the right thing. We have got to roll that back. We have got to make this an incredible place to be a public school teacher.
Mr. Henderson, thank you. Mr. West, 2 minutes.
My son Caleb has struggled with a learning disability. And one of the things we ran into in his elementary school years was he was falling behind. He was struggling with reading, he was struggling with math, he was struggling with everything. So we exercised our option and brought him home. And my wife, Christy, homeschooled him for a year. And the one thing that happened with him in going back, coming home for homeschooling, he learned everything, picked up everything. We were able to put him back in school, and he was where he should be. But one of the things that suffered in that process was his relationships. Some of his friends had moved on into deeper friendships with other people. So he went back to school alone. He went back to school in a struggle, in a battle to build friendships. And one of the reasons my son wound up in that spot, and as his teachers told us, was, as Jared just talked about, the teachers were just strangled by government. So much government regulation, government standards, all these things press on our teachers. And they take away their flexibility to teach our students. Our teachers are very well gifted. They develop brains, which is amazing to think about. But when they develop our children's brains, they need the ability and the freedom and flexibility to teach our students where they are. I think our education system needs to have an opt-out where parents who want to go and pursue another type of schooling, whether it's homeschooling or a charter school or a private school, any type of schooling, online education, parents need to have the freedom and flexibility to find the education that best suits them. And education shouldn't be about making sure, we shouldn't have this competition between public and charter schools. That's unfair. The question should be, what are we doing for our students? What are we doing for our kids? Because our kids are going to be the ones that are going to carry the future. And we can't fail them while arguing over public or charter schools.
Mr. Hutchinson, 2 minutes.
Since I've been governor, I've been in over 65 high schools and schools all across Arkansas, small and large, talking to teachers, visiting about the issues that they face. And one thing that I'm convinced of is that our traditional public schools can compete with any charter school, that they can compete with any private school. They do well. And we want to continue to support them and make sure our public school system is strong and competitive. When you look at the initiatives that we have emphasized over the last 4 years, it's the reading initiative. So they're reading at grade level in the 3rd grade, which is a foundation of reading. Our RISE initiative has been in over 300 schools across Arkansas. Continuing to give an option for the students that want to engage in workforce education in case they decide not to go to college to get a welding certificate. We've enhanced the ability of our students to access those kind of good paying jobs in the industrial sector. Continue to emphasize STEM education and computer coding in our schools. These are success stories for Arkansas, and our public schools are doing well. Teachers are a critical part of that. That's why I have set forth a plan that I was encouraged that the legislature embraced, which is to raise teacher pay once again, as we have done in the past, to raise it over the next 4 years by $4,000, so it will be the highest in the region. Now, Mr. Henderson has another plan that says we're going to pay for teacher pay increases by letting out 20% of our prison population. We're going to reduce our prison population by 20%. Let me tell you, you let thousands and thousands out of prison arbitrarily without a plan, then you're going to wind up increasing the danger to our society. That's not the right way. We've got a better plan to pay for the increase in teachers' pay.
Mr. Henderson, 1 minute.
Well, something remarkable just happened right now. I think Governor Hutchinson just became the first sitting Arkansas governor to say that our state is not capable of matching the achievements of Mississippi. You know, Governor Hutchinson just criticized my criminal justice plan that I released last week. I proposed doing what Mississippi has already done over the last 8 years. Did you know in the last 8 years, Mississippi has cut their prison population by 18%. Crime has gone down. They've already saved $40 million. They are on track to save $250 million over the next decade. The governor received a report about 2 years ago that said if we don't have leadership in our criminal justice system, that the Arkansas taxpayers are going to be on the hook for $650 million in new spending over the next 5 years. I think that demands a response and a set of proposals. You know, my teacher plan, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, not just the ideas behind it, but how we pay for it. And I'll let the educators in the audience evaluate it on its merits.
Ms. Lee has the next question. First to Mr. West.
All right, well, Mr. West, let's talk about the prison system. The Arkansas Department of Correction is dealing with a number of issues, from overcrowding and staffing to recent drug deaths in various units. So do you think we need prison reform, and is privatization the answer?
Una, thank you for that question. Criminal justice reform is a big deal for me. One of the things that really troubles me is, as Jared was just talking, is the thing we used to do in Arkansas was we would look at all the national statistics, whether it was education or the economy. We're always thankful we had Mississippi down below us, and now Mississippi's gotten ahead of us in reforming their prison system. One of the big issues we have in Arkansas is the way we do criminal justice, and part of that is exacerbating the problem. It's exacerbating the problem because we wind up with too many people in prison that shouldn't be there. One thing we can begin doing, and this is something that I've proposed, and I believe Jared agrees with me at least in part on it, is our policing needs to deal with drugs differently. We have been in a drug war in Arkansas that has cost police officers' lives, it's cost communities, when really drugs are not a penal system issue. They are a healthcare issue. And most people will tell you, especially if they've done the research, most studies show that if someone goes to jail just simply for drugs, they come back out more likely to do it again and actually commit a worse offense when they come out. Now, those that go to treatment rather than prison, they are 1/3 less likely to go back to doing drugs. So we need to treat drugs, we need to treat drug addiction and our drug problem in the state as a healthcare issue, as an issue and in doing so, what that will do is it will create the opportunity to to have a smaller prison population. I believe that people that are in prison right now for drug-related offenses, they should be immediately released. We should have, and we can put together a program to make it to where they can transition back into society, a transition program where they can get employment, job skills, job training, job education, have the plan in place, release those people, and ease the burden on our prison system as a whole.
To Mr. Hutchinson.
Whenever you look at what Mississippi did, they had a burgeoning prison population because they had put in truth in sentencing, they had enhanced the penalties, and so they were going out the roof with their prison population. They started implementing the reforms that we have already implemented in Arkansas. And so Mr. Henderson's talk about Mississippi is really not applicable here. In Arkansas, we did have the Pew Research which made some recommendations, and that was alternative sentencing. That was not to send someone automatically back to prison that had a parole violation, if it could be considered a technical violation. So we implemented these reforms. One of the things that we did was we put in 250 reentry beds so that we can ease people coming out of prison so that they get more support. We put in crisis stabilization units, which is a very significant program, so that we're not loading up our county jails and our prison systems with those that have mental health problems. We're trying to divert them to get the help that they need. And so all of these reforms and alternative sentencing and emphasis on drug treatment courts have been put into place. Now, on top of that, Mr. Henderson now wants to say we ought to reduce the prison population arbitrarily by 20%. That are thousands and thousands that would be let go. And let me tell you, I see it, I work with the prison system, and you cannot do that and keep the public safe. We need to invest in more parole officers, which we are doing. We need to enhance the reentry programs, which we were doing, but we need to make sure that we keep our streets safe and to make sure we're not letting out of prison those that would endanger our families and our communities.
2 minutes, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you. Well, I will say, you know, one of the most significant events in my life over the last couple of years has been becoming a father. So I share the concerns for public safety that everyone on this stage and every single person watching this debate shares. I also know that when we compare ourselves to Mississippi, we too do have a burgeoning prison population. If Arkansas were a country, there would only be 5 nations in the world that incarcerate a higher percentage of their people than we do. And while Mississippi has been making dramatic progress, we've been going in the opposite direction. And we have been putting a few initiatives here and there in place that plant some seeds for progress. But I know for a fact that we're not doing enough. I know for a fact that the ideas that I've released are not only doable but necessary, because I didn't write them myself. I wrote them in conjunction with dozens of law enforcement officials from around the state, working in every corner of this state. I wrote it working in conjunction with all manner of mental health professionals, both those that work in the criminal justice system and in other parts of our society. I worked it and developed it alongside members of communities that share the same concerns for public safety, but also see firsthand the countless number of families we are destroying when there are other completely safe alternatives to $22,000 a year incarceration. This is just an area where we need to put smart politics aside, which tells us just to pound the table for public safety and not innovate and not lead. We need to face this, have the courage to do what other states have done. Yes, in a smart, cautious manner, but with some decisiveness, with some courage. The people of Arkansas are counting on us to solve this problem. If we don't, they're going to get hit with a $650 million bill right about the time the next governor's term ends.
Back now to Mr. West for 1 minute.
While I do applaud that there are some initiatives in place, they don't go far enough. Our prison population continues to grow, which continues to put that debt and that burden on more and more Arkansans and on more of our future. I think we need an approach, as I've already outlined, that treats the drug issue as a healthcare issue. It's a way to treat it that respects the family unit and is actually focused on helping strengthen that family, because the key thing to making the whole economy grow, to bringing up those other 90% of the counties that have been ignored for 4 years, is we have to rebuild communities. And you don't rebuild communities by destroying families over non-victimless crimes or over victimless crimes. So what we need to do in those communities instead is stop locking up people for victimless crimes, but secondly, we need to give them the opportunity to grow. We need to have close the job skills gap so that people have a job skill that is marketable so they can go to work and rebuild their community.
Next question, Lance Turner, first for Mr. Hutchinson.
Governor, since President Trump started trade talks with several countries, most notably China, Arkansas farmers have taken it on the chin, enduring punishing prices for products like soybeans. Meanwhile, companies like Walmart warn that retaliatory tariffs will result in higher prices on a range of goods for their customers. How much time do we give the Trump administration in its trade war with China, which, at least in the short term, threatens the livelihood of Arkansas's agriculture industry and the pocketbooks of Arkansas consumers?
In my conversations with President Trump, I've personally pushed back on tariffs and how they have hurt us in Arkansas in terms of our agricultural community. Now, I recognize, though, that he has achieved some success. We have a new NAFTA agreement that needed to be modernized. That was a tough trade policy he took, and he had success in it. Whenever it comes to overseas, you have to look at a continued trade war with China that hurts the consumers in Arkansas, that hurts our farmers. Right now, our soybean farmers are stressed to find the markets that they need for their product. And so I want to see an end to this trade skirmishing and war. Hopefully we can get that resolved successfully, but it needs to be done very quickly. I've been a voice for Arkansas agriculture in terms of our openness of global trade, because we have to depend upon that. We're such great producers. I was the first governor to go to Cuba to market our agricultural products after we restored diplomatic relations to Cuba. We actually sold tons of poultry to Cuba after I left there, and we reached an agreement there. But we need to open up that market. We need to open up China's market. We need to push on Europe and say we need that market open to Arkansas agriculture. That's what will help us in the long run. I'll continue to be a voice for that global trade and make sure the administration knows how that impacts us. It impacts us also in our recruitment of industry, because some of our industry in Arkansas depends upon aluminum or steel that comes from overseas in their production line that they can't get elsewhere. And so hopefully this can be resolved very quickly so we continue the job growth that's been successful in Arkansas for us.
2 minutes, Mr. Henderson.
Well, you know, as the tariff debate has unfolded and its consequences have hit our farmers, our producers and consumers of steel and aluminum, you know, this is one of those issues that for me, being new to politics, is a little bit hard for me to understand. I think because it is so unambiguous to me that we need to stand up on every platform and every audience, including in the Oval Office, if we have that opportunity, and just say unequivocally and directly that this is a horrible idea and that our citizens, our farmers, our consumers are hurting because of a reckless and unnecessary policy. You know, and there's been some news in the last couple weeks about this new NAFTA deal, but you know, in the farmers and the consumers that I've talked to, it's still kind of hard to discern how it's different from the old deal and what we've gotten for all of our trouble. I do know one thing that we've gotten, which is a $12 billion taxpayer-funded bailout. It seems to me that these are very easy, common sense things to stand up and say. If your loyalty, if your calculus is what's best for Arkansans. This trade war should have never been started. It still doesn't have clear goals, and the damage to our farmers and to businesses around the state continues. You know, it was several months ago that Baker up in Rogers announced the cancellation of 100 new jobs. You know, the struggles of our soybean farmers are well known. You know, the question is, when does it end, and what's going to be the cost? You know, we also heard in the news recently that Ford, you know, which is not in Arkansas but affects Arkansas consumers, has lost $1 billion. They're going to be having layoffs. This ripples through and affects us We need leadership that stands up, especially when something is this easy and clear cut, and says so.
Mr. West, 2 minutes.
Well, I know that in the business I work in, one of the things that we have is this concept of cost. We have to bill our clients for our cost, and we're going to make sure that we make money so we can pay our employees so they can go home and feed their families. And what tariffs are, in their rawest essence, when you really boil them down, is they are just a new tax. It's just another tax that consumers are going to have to pay. Those businesses in China or the businesses in America are not going to just pay those taxes and say, well, we're good patriots, we're going to pay this tax and we're just going to keep charging the same price. No, they can't do that. They're going to go out of business. They can't feed their families that way. So this was a very poorly conceived idea, and it's very atrocious the way it has impacted Arkansas farmers, especially when we get news this week from Talk Business and Politics, where we see that our soybean crops, instead of the usual 1% to 2% that suffer from mold and mildew, since we've had an exceptionally more humid summer, those crops are suffering at 5% to 7%. So the farmers are already stressed with that additional loss, and now they're going to have more loss because these tariffs are going to hurt. So what we need to do is get away from this concept that our government needs to negotiate how we trade with other people. If I'm growing apples in my yard and I want to sell you some apples and you want to buy those apples, at whatever price we agree to, why do we even need a government involved in that transaction? We don't. And if I'm selling bad apples, you can tell somebody else I sell bad apples and they won't buy them apples. And I know some of you are saying, you know, how you like them apples. But what we need to understand is we need to simplify difficult economic concepts. And the simple concept is this: if I make a product and you want to buy it, there's no reason the government should tell you you can't buy it unless I'm trying to hurt you or I'm trying to harm you. If it's shown that I'm trying to be a good business and I'm trying to make a living, government has no right to even be involved in that transaction.
Mr. Hutchinson, 1 minute.
Mr. West said early on in the debate that 90% of Arkansas is in decline. I could not dispute that more. Whenever you look at the job growth, the wage growth, the economic growth in Arkansas, it has been across the state. And certainly there's pockets that we need to work harder on, but I'm very proud of the fact that I was down in Dumas for a jobs announcement of 60 new jobs at SF Holland that's in the automobile industry. I go to Melbourne, microplastics is expanding. I go to Helena, West Helena, where Envirotech from California located there. You go down to Glenwood, very proud of Conifex, a Canadian company, restarting the mill there in the timber industry that's so important, creating over 100 jobs, and they can't get enough people physically to work in the plant. They need more people. They need more workers. Those are the job opportunities that are here, and there's all over Arkansas, from Melbourne to Dumas, and that's the kind of growth we need, and we're having success all over Arkansas.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have reached the portion, or the part of our broadcast in which has come the time for closing statements. And again, as was decided by a drawing prior to the broadcast, Mr. West will have your closing statement first.
Arkansas, I hope that tonight you have seen a new way to do government, a way that is not the Republican way and it's not the Democrat way. It's just the common sense Arkansan way. I have laid out how we can do government based on libertarian principles, based on principles that matter to me and that I think will be best for the most Arkansans. The core principle of libertarians is what we call the non-aggression principle. You'll hear us call it the NAP on occasion. And to boil it down, it's simply this: don't hurt people, don't take their things. Now, I don't think anyone on the stage would disagree that that's a great way to deal with each other. However, libertarians go further. We say, you know what, the government shouldn't hurt people or take their things either. As a Christian, I was a pastor, or I have been a pastor for 15 years. And one of the things that always stood out to me is Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It was kind of his marching instructions for those who follow him. And one of those instructions was, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That simple verse matches so well with the non-aggression principle, and that is why I became a libertarian and began believing that we can use this philosophy not just for each other, but we can hold our government to that same standard. And that is what I've come out here to talk about today, is let's get away from this bitter fight over how much more power we can give the government. You know, let's fill the tank by 5 drops or 4 drops. That's what you have in the two gentlemen to my right. They both want to keep the government in power. They want to keep the money in the state government, and they expect everything to fix itself with their government solutions. I'm not here today to offer you a government solution. I'm here to offer a way of scaling back the government so that you are empowered with liberty. So that through the liberty you're empowered with, you can empower the state of Arkansas to become the destination state for liberty, so that our children and grandchildren want to build their lives, build their futures here with us.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hutchinson, 2 minutes.
Thank you. And what you have on the platform is one candidate who believes in no government. You've got another candidate who believes in a massive expansion of government, not having tax reductions. And then you've got a balance that looks at government as having responsibility, but to achieve it efficiently, lowering taxes, competing with the private sector in terms of their growth more than the government sector. One of the things that I'm very pleased with is what we did in the Restore Hope initiative. And this is a good example of where we took the private sector and the faith-based organizations, brought them together and said, we have 2 challenges. We want to have more effective programs for those coming out of prison to give them a second chance. We need to have more effective programs for our foster children that we have a responsibility for. You can't say we're not going to take on that responsibility in government. It is ours to take that child that's been neglected or abused and give them a home. And so we enlisted the faith-based community, but we did our part too. We hired more caseworkers. We had more child welfare investigators. We invested in some reentry programs. That's the kind of balance that addresses real problems in the lives of people that makes the difference for our state. And I think that that's important. I've been blessed in life to have served 2 presidents in significant positions. There's not been a higher privilege than I've had than to serve the people of Arkansas as governor. Today, I'm asking for your support for re-election because we kept our promises, the test of the last 4 years. We've expanded growth in Arkansas, created opportunity, but it is all about the future. And we're going to have a good highway plan. We're going to increase the pay for teachers. We're going to transform government to be more efficient, and we're going to make sure we lower taxes so that we can continue to grow the private sector and compete with everyone else around us. Thank you.
Mr. Hutchinson, thank you. Mr. Henderson, a close 2 minutes.
Yes, well, I would like to thank everyone who has participated in this debate today and who's tuned in to watch and discuss this discussion. You know, in my first political race, the question that I ask myself all the time is, how will my son look back on my candidacy and the things that I stand for when he's old enough to look back on it? What will he see, and what will we have achieved for him and his generation? And I look at that through the lens of what my parents and my grandparents and their generation have done. You know, Arkansas, over the last few generations, we built some of the most extraordinary businesses in the entire world. We've developed and grown an agricultural sector that is important to mankind. We produce world-class leadership in politics and culture, even sometimes in athletics. And it has me ask, what are we going to do next? What will make the biggest difference? What will unlock opportunity for most of our kids and push them to set even higher goals? And for me, it's very clear. In the next decade, this needs to be the best place in the United States to be a public school teacher, especially in high-poverty schools. We can destroy the cycle of childhood poverty in so many families and so many communities if we will have the courage to face our nation-leading teen pregnancy rates. We can be one of the first states in the country to figure out common-sense ways to finally get health insurance costs under control so that more people can have access to the resources that will help them live full lives. I'm running because I want us to achieve big, possible and practical things so that we can do what previous generations have done. We can set up our kids for things that we can't even imagine yet. It is fully within our power to do this. If we set the right priorities, we have some vision, and we work with the incredible people that are already and have always been in this state. Thank you.
Mr. Henderson, thank you. And so concludes Debate Week here on the Arkansas Educational Television Network. Thanks, of course, tonight to our panelists, Ms. Lee, Mr. Hiblin, Mr. Turner. Ladies and gentlemen, the Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian candidates for governor of Arkansas. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Thanks to our audience. Thanks to the University of Central Arkansas for hosting these debates. We'll see you in a couple of years.
Major funding for Election 2018 AETN debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.